Near to the Wild Heart is a 1943 novel by the Brazilian author Clarice Lispector. Lispector was born in Ukraine in 1920, but her family moved to Brazil where they had relatives to escape the Russian pogroms that were then afflicting the Jewish community to which they belonged. Clarice was the youngest of three daughters, and her parents changed her name, as they changed nearly all their names, when they arrived. She was born Chaya Lispector. She was a talented student. She attended law school, then began to work at a newspaper in Rio de Janeiro, where she began to write sections of what later became Near to the Wild Heart. She had already published a short story, but she was skeptical of her ability to produce anything longer. When I reread what I've written, she remarked at the time, I feel like I'm swallowing my own vomit. When Near to the Wild Heart was first published, it had a pink cover because the author was a woman. It wasn't expected to sell, but if it made any profits, they'd all go straight to the publisher. Nevertheless, it was a triumph. Lispector had not only learned the lessons of modernism, but built on them. The earlier modernists, Joyce and Woolf and Faulkner, had all successfully written about the world in new ways, which of course required seeing it afresh. Lispector took this a step further and examined the significance of this new way of seeing. In other words, Wild Heart has a philosophical intent. It's the story of a woman called Joanna. She's orphaned in early childhood and she goes to live with her aunt and uncle, who eventually become intimidated by her strangeness and unpredictability. When she's a young woman, she marries a man called Ottavio, but she can't relate to him in any conventional way, and he eventually leaves her, after which she takes up with an unnamed, rather peculiar man who's been stalking her. When he eventually leaves, she suspects he's been arrested. The book ends with Joanna on a boat and a premonition of her future. She prays desperately to God, but then has an epiphany in which she realizes she's spiritually self-sufficient. Lispector doesn't attempt to conceal the source of Joanna's strangeness. She's strange because she's had a mystical insight into the way the world really is. That insight continues to animate her in the sense that a genuine truth once glimpsed can so easily do. So on page 90, we read that Joanna could no longer deny the luminous centre of things, the confirmation underpinning everything, the harmony that existed beneath things she didn't understand. The chief formal philosophical support for Near to the Wild Heart is the thought of the 17th century Jewish philosopher Baruch Spinoza, who created a philosophical system in which the whole of reality is an extension of God, and the world is ruled by an absolute logical necessity. Spinoza appears in chapter 3 of part 2 as a kind of sympathetic bond between Ottavio and Joanna. What makes Near to the Wild Heart original, even from a Spinozian perspective, is the way Lispector tries to reconcile Joanna's sense of glorious aloneness with her conviction that everything is one. Does she succeed? Readers will probably differ. In any case, Joanna ought to be unhappy, and occasionally she is. But her unhappiness never lasts, and she's often ecstatically enthused by the world, which is how the book leaves her. The Penguin edition of Near to the Wild Heart comes with a very good introduction by one of Lispector's biographers, Benjamin Moser, who makes much of her Spinozian inspiration. Her artistic vision, he says, can be summed up in a sentence she coined herself. Good writing is a matter of surprising the symbol of the thing in the thing itself. There's a sense that Joanna's what we'd all be if we only made a determined effort to see the world aright. That's partly why this continues to be an important and challenging novel.